Hi. Ugh, hi. We can do this. We can do this. It's Mackenzie. I've been away for a while on this channel, so this is a different kind of video that I've never made before, obviously. I am so nervous right now. And also, I decided to film right at sunset for some reason, so the light's gonna slowly go away throughout this video. If you read the title of the video, then you already know that this is going to be about why I left the Mormon church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They don't call themselves Mormons as of like 2 years ago. It's gonna be a pretty long video. There's a lot that I could talk about. First of all, I want to talk about why I'm making this video. It's not necessarily to tear down the church or disrespect anyone that I know. Basically, the reason why I'm making this video is because videos like this helped me so much, and if there's an opportunity for me to do that for someone else, I really wanted to be able to do that. If there's anyone that I know or any members of the church that are watching, I don't hold anything against you. I still love you. This is just going to be about my experience. It's been over a year since I left the church, and when I use the word left the church, I'm meaning when I mentally decided that it wasn't for me. So I'm not talking about when I stopped going or when I removed my records from the church, because I still haven't removed my records from the church. I still consider myself ex-Mormon, even though I am still technically on their rolls as a member. Again, this is just my experience. Other people have had it better, and other people have had it much worse. I would love to answer any respectful comments, and I'll leave every single resource that helped me or that I know helped others in the description box below. There'll be tons there. So now that I've said all that, we can get into the story. So I grew up in a really happy LDS home in a very LDS town in Utah. If anyone doesn't really know about the LDS church, I'll leave information about them down below, but I feel like it would take too much time to explain the fundamentals of the religion. Just know that it's a high demand religion that was started in the 1800s in America, and it's mostly in Utah. Growing up, I didn't realize that there was any other way to live. I thought that everyone went to church and that everyone had the same exact experience. I was actually probably 7 years old before I can remember meeting someone who wasn't Mormon. There's a lot of little nuances and big differences in growing up Mormon, and I can do a separate video on that if you're interested, but I won't go too much into it here besides what's relevant to the story. Things got a little bit worse in high school because I was raised to be really empathetic and skeptical, and that also went alongside being raised Mormon. So there was a lot of conflict there because I saw the way that people had a problem with the way that the church treated marginalized people, and then I saw the way that science didn't line up with what the church was teaching, but at the same time I was taught to have faith no matter what. I started realizing how patriarchal the church was, and I was exposed to new ideas like feminism and equality, and I was just taught that that's the way things were. Women had their place and men had their place, which was as leaders. Also in high school, the November 2015 policy came out. The November policy was a policy that the church came out with that said children who had gay parents wouldn't be allowed to get baptized until they were legally adults. That's a very boiled down version of what it was, but it caused a lot of conflict within me and within a lot of people. I know that it caused a lot of people to reevaluate. However, simultaneously in high school, I worked really hard to develop my testimony, and I went to seminary, I went to church every week, I participated in the Young Women's, I went to all my meetings, I read my scriptures every single day, I prayed every single day, I developed those habits. I got my patriarchal blessing and I got my young womanhood recognition, which if you're not Mormon you won't understand what any of these things are, but I can answer any questions if you have any. I first went inactive when I was 19 for about a year, but I still believed in the church. I just didn't go. I heard rumors here and there about what the church was hiding, but I didn't really pay much attention to it, and I came back to church a year later. The reason why I did this was because I was told my whole life that the only way to be happy was to live the gospel, which is following the rules. So I thought that if I came back to church, repented of my sins, tried as hard as I could to be the perfect Mormon girl, then I would be happy, and that my doubts and my issues would eventually go away, and that they would be soothed eventually. I went back to participating heavily in church. I accepted a calling. I went to all the activities. I started a blog. I went to Institute, and I went to BYU Education Week, which is just a bunch of gospel classes. I went to that with my parents. I was just so desperate to learn as much as I could about this beautiful thing that everyone said was going to be like the most important thing in the entire universe. As time went on, somehow I still had doubts, but imagine that. Those things that I wanted answers for didn't get better, they only festered. And I turned to several people that I trusted to get some sort of wisdom or answers, and I got absolutely nothing. And obviously I was praying so much, and I was reading my scriptures, which is what they tell you to do. Those were the only answers that I really got, was that I should study harder and pray more often and more earnestly, and then it just started feeling a little bit silly. The biggest thing for me was probably LGBTQ+ issues. I didn't understand why the church had such strong opinions about what gay people did and how it was so evil. And I also had issues with the law of chastity. I didn't really understand the necessity of that either. Basically, if it didn't hurt anybody and it made them happy, I didn't really understand why the church would be so against that. Because the church teaches that homosexual behavior and sex before marriage is a sin second only to murder. It's that serious. Eventually I started mentioning these struggles with my very Mormon therapist. She wasn't a lot of help, but it was helpful for me to say it out loud and start to be honest with myself and what was going on in my head. So I realized that I was knee-deep in a faith crisis, which was terrifying. I was scared to tell anyone, I was scared to mention it to anyone, and I was definitely too scared to look up anything. When you're Mormon, you are taught to not look up anything, and that anything that you find that is against or different than what the church has said is anti-Mormon lies. I did tell my parents a little bit about it. They were understandably anxious about it too. My dad actually made it worse unknowingly by giving me this talk that was, I think it was by Dallin H. Oaks, but the talk was basically about these are the things that the church believes, that they will always believe, this is what the church is fundamentally. And I just remember reading this talk and thinking, I don't believe this. I don't think this is right. And I was so sad by that. I just remember crying about it and thinking, what do I do? Like, is my eternal salvation at risk here? So the first thing that I had the courage to look up was Mormon faith crisis. I just typed it into Google, and the first website that popped up was mormonfaithcrisis.com. So that website is basically for a podcast that's done by John and Margie DeLynn and Natasha Helfer Parker, and it's just for people who are going through Mormon faith crises. reading through some of the stories on that website made me feel a lot less alone, and that there was someone else who had gone through this and had felt the same things that I was feeling. I will link it down below. Highly recommend it. At that point, I hadn't really gotten into any of the specific issues that I had with the church. I was just more looking for support. So I came across a video from a channel called Chrissy's Corner here on YouTube. If you type in why I left the Mormon church, she's probably one of the first videos that will pop up for you. Chrissy's story affected me deeply. I really related to it, and that's when it happened. I went to the description box and I clicked on this CES letter, and I read the whole thing in one sitting. Now, if you are ex-Mormon and you're familiar with the CES letter, then you understand what the next few hours were like for me. But if not, I'll just give you a little bit of what I went through. So the CES letter is a letter written to the Church Educational System, or CES, by a man named Jeremy Reynolds, and he was a very faithful member of the church who came across a lot of issues regarding church history and practices and policies, and he wanted answers. So he compiled them all and then made them available for other people to read. The information in the CES letter is like mind-blowing. It raises issues within every single facet of the foundations of Mormonism, right from its very inception. I remember the moment that I decided, I'm out, I can't do this, no, was a very specific moment. And I think that a lot of other ex-Mormons can relate to this. It's a very physical feeling when your shelf breaks. The shelf breaking is a metaphor. Basically, anytime something that makes you doubt the church or is incongruous with what you learned growing up, you put it up on the shelf and you try to ignore it. And so the more issues you have, you put them up on the shelf, and eventually there's too many. And maybe there's one giant thing that just makes the whole thing crash down, or maybe it just becomes too heavy eventually with all the little things. It's a very effective metaphor. So my moment was when I was reading about how the Book of Mormon was translated by Joseph Smith. You're taught growing up that Joseph Smith had these ancient golden plates that he translated from using the power of God, and he would read it and then he would translate what the words meant in English, and then his scribe would write it down. Here are some artist renditions of what I grew up thinking the translation looked like. Turns out how Joseph Smith actually translated the Book of Mormon was he would take a hat, and then there was a rock, just a normal rock, that he called a seer stone or a peep stone, and he would actually use this rock before this to look for buried treasure. He actually was arrested a few times for fraud for treasure digging, but that's a different story. So he would put the rock in the hat and then put his face in the hat, and then he would tell the scribe what to write down. So here's some artist renditions of what actually happened. You can see why the church would not want to spread that narrative. That's just one example of the over 100 pages of things like this within the CES letter. Joseph Smith was not at all who I was taught he was. The Book of Mormon was not as perfect as I thought it was. Joseph Smith and Brigham Young married so many underage girls, and I had heard rumors of that, but seeing the actual proof of it was really gross. Anyway, the craziest thing is that in the months following, as I kept learning, I realized that the CES letter does not cover it all. It doesn't come close to covering it all. There is so much. So yeah, I felt really betrayed, really lied to, but also in a weird way I felt really like relieved, and that I had finally gotten all the answers that I was looking for. And it felt like it had been a lifetime in the making. So I felt kind of free. I felt kind of at peace. Immediately following that, I felt really scared to tell any of my Mormon loved ones about what had happened, because I didn't really know how they would respond. So it took me months to tell anyone, really, because I had heard so many stories of people being shunned, of people being so hurt by the information, which it makes sense that they would be hurt. Mormons are taught that you are together in the afterlife based on how well you live the gospel. So basically I was telling my parents, hey, we're not going to be together in the afterlife, which is really hard because that's their reality. That's what they think is going to happen. Okay, so I tried to arrange some stuff to fix the lighting. It's not ideal. I've got my laptop in my lap now. Laptop in the lap. So I'm going to be looking down at that. I've been going through notes as I'm telling this story so I don't leave anything out. So as I was saying, Mormons are taught a very specific narrative about people who leave the church. That they're misled, that they're lazy, all sorts of different things that aren't necessarily true. So I was afraid to be honest about where I was and who I was, because I didn't want to be seen by members the way that I saw people who left the church when I was a member, which is a really sobering thing. People often say, I'm sorry for what I said when I was Mormon, because when you leave you realize how hard it is, and it's really easy to be dismissive until you go through that thing. Anyway, so it took me a few months. The first person I told was, I think, my best friend, Shayla. She took it really well, honestly. I think she was mostly sad that I hadn't told her immediately, and that I was kind of hiding things from her. I waited quite a few months before I had kind of an actual conversation with my parents about it. And even then it wasn't anything super in-depth. I still really haven't been able to have a conversation about it with my dad. I don't really know how. So obviously my parents were disapproving of how I was living my life, and it's not at all what they wanted for me. I was dating a guy at the time who was an atheist, which was great actually to have someone close to me that was an atheist when I left the church, because he understood and I felt like I wasn't going to lose absolutely everything. But I think my parents thought that he was rubbing off on me or influencing me in any way, which was not true at all. I think now that it's been a little bit, they kind of realized that it's not just a phase, and that this is who I am now. Anyway, last summer they encouraged me to move out, which was basically them saying, please move out. And so I did. I think it was just a difficult situation for everyone. We didn't really know how to talk about it, and we still don't. But I'm working on it. I'm trying to be more honest, and I'm sure that this video will, if they see it, will cause more attention, but maybe it'll help them to see a little bit more where I'm coming from and what I've been through. Anyway, life post CES letter, post shelf break, has been wild. It's been so different and so challenging, but also so great. It's really hard to explain all of it, but basically I've just been able to expand my horizons and experience life in a way that I didn't know was possible. Things like coffee and voting how I want to vote, and getting a tattoo. I got a tattoo. I found a lot of solace in the ex-Mormon community. It can be really, really lonely when you leave the church. You lose your whole community. I watched a lot of ex-Mormon YouTubers, like Self on the Shelf was amazing. I love them so much. I watched every single one of their videos. Mr. Atheist was really good to watch, and also podcasts like my very favorite podcast, Latter-day Lesbian. All of these things helped me feel a little less alone, that there were so many people out there going through the same thing. I think ex-Mormons understand each other in a way that no one else really can. So yeah, the past year or so I've just been trying to find who I am and what I believe in, the ways that I want to live my life and create that life for myself. I'm trying to build my relationships in a way that feels authentic and healthy. I'm trying to find new friends. It's not super easy right now to find friends, especially with the coronavirus going around. Another thing that changed after I left the church was I realized that I am attracted to women and as well as men. So I came out as bisexual to my parents not that long ago. I started dating a woman about a month ago and it's been going really well. I'm super happy, but it was another thing that made my parents go, what's going on? I think I try not to shock them, but I don't know. It's hard to know what's the best way to have these conversations. I think that's about it for this video. I think we're all caught up at this point. I'm feeling more confident in myself every day. I'm learning new things all the time. It's such a process. It's such a weird, sad, exciting, joyous, depressing thing to go through. Like I said, I'll have all sorts of resources in the description. I'll have some church approved resources. Also, Letter to My Wife is another thing that came out after the CES letter, which I've read that one as well. Just the amount of resources available to people questioning Mormonism or having Mormon faith crises has gone way up in the past few years, even since I left. I feel so grateful to people like Jeremy Runnels, people like John Dehlin, people like the guy who wrote Letter to My Wife, who kind of paved the way for questioning Mormons and made it easier for those who came after them. If any ex-Mormons are watching that have some other resources that they think could be really valuable, you are welcome to leave them in the comments below. I would love that. Basically, the main message that I want people to walk away from this video with is that we all have our things that we grew up with that don't work for us anymore when we get older. And sometimes that can be super hard to leave behind. And if you are going through anything similar to what I went through, if you feel so alone right now, I want you to know that it gets better. If you made it to the end of this video, thanks so much for listening to me. This was really difficult to make and really scary, and I just hope that it came across the way that I wanted it to. I will most likely be making more videos on this, especially if this is received well. Love you so much, thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye!